In October 1889, two lighthouse keepers on an isolated rock off the Maine coast reported something impossible in their logbook. Something that made fishing boats turn back miles before reaching shore. What began as routine fog bell maintenance turned into weeks of mounting dread as night grew longer, the sea grew louder, and something gray rose higher with each tide. Their final entry, written in a hand that wasn't quite steady, mentioned the water reaching the gallery door. I was 28 when they sent me to Gull Rock Light. The assignment came through in September. 6 months on, 6 months off. The rock sat 9 miles from shore, a granite tooth jutting from the Atlantic with barely enough flat surface for the tower and keeper's dwelling. The previous keeper had resigned without explanation. The district supervisor said it was family troubles. He did not look at me when he said it. My partner was named Thaddeus Webb. He was older, 50 or so, with hands scarred from rope burns and a quiet way of speaking. He had kept lights up and down the coast since before I was born. When we met at the dock in Portland, he shook my hand once and checked the supply crates without small talk. The boat ride out was rough, October swells. The captain dropped us at the base of the iron ladder bolted into the rock and did not linger. As the boat pulled away, Webb climbed first. I followed with a crate strapped to my back. The dwelling was small, 2 rooms, a kitchen with a coal stove, bunks built into the walls. The air smelled of salt, mildew, and old tobacco. Webb showed me the routine. Trim wicks at dusk. Wind the clockwork every 4 hours. Ring the fog bell when visibility dropped below half a mile. Keep the logbook current. The light turned on a weighted mechanism that descended through the tower. Every night, we climbed the iron stairs to wind it back to the top. The bell hung outside on a wooden frame bolted to the rock. It weighed 1,000 pounds and rang by a mechanical striker powered by its own weight-driven clock. Webb said the sound carried 5 miles in clear air, farther when fog pressed low. On the 3rd night, the bell rang on its own. I woke to the deep toll echoing through the walls. I sat up. The sound came slow and steady, the rhythm of the automatic striker. But I had not wound the bell mechanism that evening. I knew I had not. Webb was already pulling on his boots. He did not speak. We went outside. The air was still. No fog. The stars were sharp, and the beam from the tower cut a clean arc over black water. The bell swung slightly, the clapper touching the bronze with each beat. Webb walked to the mechanism housing and opened the panel. The weights hung slack. The gears were still. "Who wound this?" he asked. "Not me," I said. He stared at the bell. It rang 3 more times and stopped. The silence after felt heavier than the sound. Webb closed the panel and latched it. We went back inside. He wrote nothing in the log. I asked if we should note it. He shook his head. "Sometimes the wind catches it," he said. But there had been no wind. The next day, a fishing boat passed within a mile. I waved from the gallery, but the boat turned and moved back toward the mainland without signaling. I mentioned it to Webb at supper. He nodded and said the fishermen had their reasons. He did not say what they were. The bell rang again 2 nights later. This time, I was awake. I heard it start at just past midnight. I went to the window and saw Webb already outside, standing near the bell frame with a lantern. The mechanism was still locked. The weights had not moved. Yet the bell swung and rang with perfect rhythm. I pulled on my coat and joined him. The cold bit through the wool. My breath hung in the air. The sound filled my chest and made my ribs hum. "Stop it," Webb said to the bell. His voice was quiet, almost conversational. The ringing continued. He reached out and pressed his hand flat against the bronze. The vibration ran up his arm and into his shoulder. The bell rang twice more and then stopped. Webb pulled his hand back and flexed his fingers. There were no marks, but he winced. "Feels like current," he said. "But there's no current here." We checked the housing again. Nothing had changed. Back inside, Webb finally wrote in the log. Bell activation. No mechanical cause identified. Weather clear. He dated it and closed the book. Over the next week, small things went wrong. The clockwork for the light began losing time. Not much, a few minutes each night. I adjusted it daily, but the drift continued. The coal stove burned hotter than it should, even when damped down. The air in the dwelling grew dry and smelled faintly of char. Webb's watch stopped working. He wound it, shook it, held it to his ear. The hands did not move. He set it aside and relied on the tower clock instead. The logbook began to show something strange. I noticed it first when checking the previous week's entries. The times for sunrise and sunset were recorded as always, but the intervals between them had grown shorter. I counted the hours. Daylight was losing 15 minutes per day. I thought I had miscalculated. I counted again. The pattern held. I showed Webb. He sat with the book open on his lap, staring at the columns of numbers. He did not argue. He went to the shelf and pulled down the almanac. He compared the printed times to what we had recorded. The almanac showed the expected seasonal change. Our log showed something else. Night was coming earlier and lasting longer. "Are we writing it wrong?" I asked. "We're not," Webb said. He closed the almanac. "I've noticed the dark. The fishing boats stopped coming within 5 miles. We saw their sails on the horizon, but they stayed far out. One morning, I climbed to the gallery and counted 7 boats working a line parallel to the coast. All of them kept the same distance from Gull Rock, as if an invisible boundary had been drawn. The bell rang every night after that, always between midnight and 2 in the morning. Always the same slow rhythm." Webb stopped trying to explain it. We let it ring until it stopped on its own, which it always did after 10 or 12 tolls. The sound sank into my sleep. I began to hear it even when it was not ringing. Then Webb saw the figure. It was late afternoon, the light just starting to fade. I was inside preparing the evening meal. Webb had gone out to check the tide markers we kept on the rock's edge. He came back in without speaking and poured himself coffee. His hands were steady, but his face had gone pale. I asked what was wrong. "There's something in the water," he said. I followed him outside. The tide was midway and rising. The ocean stretched flat and gray in every direction. Webb pointed to the north side of the rock, where the water was deeper. I saw nothing at first. Then a shape moved just below the surface. It was tall and narrow, almost upright, the color of wet stone. It drifted closer and then stopped, holding position against the current. I could not see a head or limbs clearly, only the suggestion of them beneath the surface. "How long has it been there?" I asked. "Since I came out," Webb said. "It moves when I move." I picked up a loose stone and threw it toward the shape. The stone hit the water and sank. The figure did not react. It stayed in place, swaying slightly, as if tethered. Then it sank lower and disappeared. We stood watching the water for a long time. It did not return. The tide continued to rise. By dusk, the water line had climbed higher than the markers indicated it should. I made a note of it. Webb said nothing. That night, he wrote in the log, "Unidentified presence observed north of station. Vertical profile. Submerged. Tide irregular." The next day, the water line climbed higher still. The lowest step of the iron ladder was underwater by mid-morning. Webb checked the almanac. The tide was not supposed to peak until evening. He walked the perimeter of the rock, checking the markers. Every one showed the water higher than expected. He returned and sat at the table without removing his coat. "It's rising out of cycle," he said. "How much?" 2 feet since yesterday." I thought about the shape in the water. I did not say it aloud, but I could see Webb thinking the same thing. That night, the bell rang longer. It started at midnight and did not stop until nearly 1. The rhythm never changed. Slow, even, methodical. I lay in my bunk and felt each toll in my chest. When it finally stopped, I heard something else. A sound like wet cloth dragging over stone. It came from outside, from the direction of the ladder. I sat up. Webb was already at the window. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. He nodded. The sound continued, a slow scraping that moved around the base of the tower. Then it stopped. We waited. After a minute, Webb lit a lantern and opened the door. The cold hit us immediately. The rock was wet, slick with spray even though the sea was calm. Wet marks led from the ladder to the base of the tower and then back again, as if something had climbed out, circled the structure, and returned to the water. The marks were not footprints. They were smooth and wide, without clear edges. Webb crouched and touched one. His fingers came away damp. He smelled them, then wiped his hand on his trousers. "Salt water," he said, "and something else, like metal." The smell reached me. Sharp, mineral, faintly electric. It reminded me of the air before a lightning strike. Over the next 3 days, the water continued to rise. The ladder was submerged to the 5th rung. Waves that should not have reached the dwelling began splashing against the door. Webb stopped writing full entries in the log. He marked the date, the tide level, and a single word: higher. The figure appeared again, closer this time. I saw it from the gallery during the day. It stood just below the surface, taller than before, or perhaps the water had brought it nearer to eye level. Its shape was clearer now. Long arms, a narrow torso, a head that seemed smooth and featureless. It did not move with the swell. It held still, facing the tower. "It's watching," Webb said from behind me. I did not argue. That night, the bell rang for 2 hours. The sound was deafening. I stuffed cloth in my ears, but it did not help. The vibration passed through the walls, through the floor, through my skull. When it finally stopped, my ears rang with silence. I went to the window. The figure was there, standing upright in the water. Its head was above the surface now, level with the base of the tower. It had no face I could see, only a smooth curve of gray that caught the light from the lantern room. Webb stood beside me. His breath fogged the glass. "It's rising with the tide," he said. "The tide doesn't work like this." "I know." The next morning, the water reached the door. We piled stones against the threshold, but seawater seeped through the gap. The dwelling floor was wet by noon. Webb tried the signal flare, but the fuse was damp and would not light. He tried again with a dry match. The flare sputtered and died. "We're not leaving," he said. It was not a question. I did not answer. The boats would not come. The water was still rising. That night, the figure climbed onto the rock. I heard it first, the scraping sound louder and slower than before. Webb grabbed the lantern and threw open the door. The water surged in, ankle deep, freezing. The figure stood 5 feet away, taller than either of us, its body slick and gray. It had arms too long, legs too thin. Where its face should have been was only smooth skin and 2 shallow depressions like closed eyes. It did not move toward us. It only stood, water pooling around its feet. Webb raised the lantern. The light reflected off the figure's surface, which was not skin or stone, but something in between. It glistened like wet clay. "What do you want?" Webb asked. The figure tilted its head, not a gesture of curiosity, a slow mechanical adjustment. Then it turned and walked back into the water. It sank without a ripple. The bell rang all night. At dawn, the water had risen to our knees. The logbook floated past my bunk. I grabbed it and held it above the waterline. Webb sat on the table, feet drawn up. His face was gray. He did not look at me. "We should have left," I said. "They wouldn't have come." Why not? He shook his head. They know. By midday, the water reached the stairs. We climbed to the lantern room and sealed the hatch. The light turned above us, its beams sweeping over the water that now covered the rock entirely. From the gallery, I could see the figure below. It stood submerged to its waist, head tilted back, watching the light. The bell had stopped. The whole mechanism was underwater. Webb wrote the final entry on a loose page torn from the back of the log. He used a pencil stub and wrote in block letters, "Water at gallery door. Rising still. It does not stop watching." He folded the page and tucked it into his shirt. The water reached the gallery by dusk. It poured through the gaps in the ironwork, cold and black. Webb and I retreated to the lantern room. There was nowhere left to go. Below us, the figure rose higher, its head now level with the gallery railing. It pressed one hand against the glass. The surface of its palm was smooth and gray. The light above us turned. The beams swept across the water, across the figure, across the empty ocean. No boats, no shore. Only the dark and the rising tide. I do not know if they found us. I do not know if the light still turns. But I remember the last thing Webb said before the water reached the door. It wanted to see how high it could go. The figure is still out there, standing in the water, waiting for the next keeper. And the sea, patient and gray, is still rising.